Welcome to the Breakthrough Story. The purpose of the Breakthrough Story is to look behind the scenes of successful individuals in Columbus, Ohio, to see what challenges and breakthroughs they experienced along their path to success. What obstacles did they face in their early stages of life, and what helped them break through those obstacles? What has helped them succeed, and what is something they did differently? These are some of the few questions we try to answer with the Breakthrough Story. This episode is brought to you by Orange Visuals. Orange Visuals is a one-stop shop listing and branding service for real estate professionals in Central Ohio. When you need to market yourself or a property, Orange Visuals provides all the services such as photo, video, brochures, single property websites, and so much more. Visit Orange Visuals today and see why top producing realtors choose to market themselves with Orange Visuals. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. This is the Breakthrough Podcast with Timothy. And then we have Yanak today joining us. He is an owner-operator of a Chick-fil-A in Washington, Pennsylvania. And I'm really excited to have him. Thank you so much for joining us, Jay.
Well, Timothy, in true Chick-fil-A fashion, it is my pleasure to be on this podcast with you. I got a chance to meet Timothy over the summer. He did some video work for my store, doing some recruiting videos featuring team members, leaders, and myself. And he was here in Washington, Pennsylvania for a couple days, and we were just able to establish a good connection, good rapport. Love talking with Timothy. And he mentioned that he had a podcast and that he would like to have me on. And I'm honored. This is the first time I've ever done something like this before. So it's exciting. It's a new thing.
Awesome. Thank you. So to get started, can you give a little bit of a background of where you are from originally? I don't remember if you said you're from Washington. Where are you from?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in Pittsburgh. So Washington is about 30 miles south of Pittsburgh. So pretty close to home where I am right now. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. Just a little, I guess, brief family history. My dad was an accountant, and he started his own practice about maybe 5 to 10 years into his professional career. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I have an older sister, Kristen, who is a teacher in the area, younger brother, Scott, who is a teacher overseas in Belgium. I'm a Pittsburgh guy through and through. I love the area. People who haven't been here, what I would say about Pittsburgh is you're definitely not going to want to come here for the weather. It's not something that people would travel to for that reason, but the people I feel like are amazing. Pittsburgh has a kind of a blue collar history with the steel mills, and a lot of those aren't operating right now, but kind of the values and the work ethic of that industry has kind of been passed on generationally, and it kind of permeates the area. So there's a lot of down to earth people who really care. So Pittsburgh's kind of like it's a city, but it feels like a small town. That's how I explain it.
So when you were growing up, how would you describe your upbringing? What kind of values did your parents instill in you that you think are even useful for you today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I do think, it's one of the things we ask, our kids when we interview them, tell me about some of your most influential people or, heroes in your life. And it's always a good answer when people say their parents, because I feel like that's where we learn so much of, how to act, how to behave, how to treat other people. And so, I grew up in, I would say my parents were very, dedicated to the local church. And so I would say a lot of my memories growing up were just being down at church and being involved in things like Sunday school, youth group. A lot of my friendships were around that church. And I was also really involved in, activities, sports was big for me growing up too. But I would say what I learned, I'd say from my dad. My dad has always just struck me as an incredible man of principle. And so he, like I mentioned before, he started his own accounting firm early on in his career. And the reason why was because he just didn't like some of the things that were going on in the work environment and just how people were treated and, maybe how customers were being treated as well. And so he decided he wanted to do something about that and, be a positive change. And so he kind of broke away and started his own business. And I look back on that and I think that, he had some, young kids at the time. We didn't have a lot of money. It was a risk that he had to take at that point. But it was something that was so important to him. And I know in the beginning, when you're starting a business, it's hard in the beginning to get things going. And so there was a lot of hard work that he put in, a lot of dedication. And I think it would have been really easy to give up and to be discouraged. But his company has a motto that's it says quality that you deserve. And that's kind of what they live by. And so it's this idea that, people deserve, quality service. They do deserve to work in a quality environment. And I've just seen with him, just remarkable consistency, over that. My dad's one of those guys that what you get with him one day, it's going to be the same the next day and the day after that. So I learned a lot about, I would say, his work ethic, his principles, and just how he viewed his role as a leader. I'll share just a kind of a funny story that I always remember. Actually, two stories. So when I was young, I was, I don't know if you want to say materialistic, but I always thought that, my dad I was into cars. I like cars and expensive cars. And I was like, Dad, why are you not driving a nicer car? You can afford a nicer car. And, he told me, he's like, Jay, I drive that car to work every single day. And the message that sends, to my employees means something. And so, if they see me driving, an expensive car, perhaps that just impacts their perception of me. So there was an element of, I guess, humility that I learned from my dad, and just how important that is, that the people that you work with see that. And I think people are attracted to that. They're attracted to a leader who is not showy and flashy, but is sincere and is humble. And then the other one that kind of shows about his dedication to principles was, we went to a restaurant one time. I think it was a Boston Market or something like that. And I ordered a water at the counter, which when you do that, they don't charge you for it. They just give you an empty cup. And I took that cup and I filled it up with soda, and I didn't pay for the soda. And I remember thinking that was funny, or that was great. I was like, oh, look, I got this, this free drink by this trick that I used on this people. And I remember sitting with the card, and he was really mad. He was really mad at me. He's like, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, what it cost them. He's like, it's the principle that you didn't pay for that. And so he, turned the car around, made me go back in and tell them what I did. And so I think I learned a lesson that day about just how important the little things are, and how important principles are too. And, I'd say with my mom, she she just really excels in like just the human relationship side of things, you know. So she's someone that if anything's ever going wrong, or I need to talk to somebody, she's the person that I go to. She's a great listener. She's a great empathizer. And so I think a lot of the care and nurture that we received as kids, you know, came from my mom. And so those are characteristics too that, you know, I saw as positives and try to, I think have been a big part of my life.
Mm-hmm. I may be making an assumption here, but I'm assuming that even those characteristics and virtues that your parents instilled in you were because they were believers and were drawing it from the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there was always that, you know, whether it was specifically, you know, mentioned or not, I think that was always the context that I was operating under. And, you know, my faith story, we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. But I think the main thing that when you think about influencing other people and instilling values too is, you know, the greatest thing I think you can do is like your own personal example too. So I think those things that are important in life, you can talk about them with your kids. You can say that these are good things to do. But, you know, with kids, I think one of the things you find is like they really watch their parents. They watch how they act. They watch how they talk. And so if they say one thing and they act differently, I think that sends, you know, really a conflicting message to kids. And so what I learned, you know, from my parents is that they really, if they told me something to do, it was usually things that they were embodying themselves or they were setting a good example for.
That integrity.
Yeah, the integrity. And I think it just made it so much easier to receive that, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. I think another way to describe it is a people of truth. They did what they said they would do, and they taught you those same things. Exactly.
Yeah.
So growing up, did you, I don't know how, like when you were growing up, did you have a desire to become something specific? Were you just kind of following your parents? How was your outlook moving forward in life? So I'm kind of, I guess, like in the middle school, high school kind of area.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I would say that for a large percentage of my like growing up, I felt purposeless. But like I didn't know like where I was going. So there was things that I was passionate about for sure. Like I said before, like I loved sports. And I loved like the, you know, both the personal, you know, excellence and discipline that sports required and like the growth process around that. And the team dynamics of, you know, kind of putting aside, you know, personal successes and stuff for the good of the team. And so I love that. And I was always like, as a young kid too, I did have an interest in like business type stuff. So one of the things, like I didn't love school, like academic.
I guess that's from your dad because he was self-employed.
Yeah, I think so. That kind of little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. But like, so like school for me, like was not like great. I didn't love school. And I went through a period where I struggled, you know, pretty heavily, with my grades and just behavior in school. But there was, you know, during that time, I was like motivated, to do things like in my community that would like make money. So like I just remember as a kid, like just little things we would go to the golf course, and we would go in the woods and find like all the golf balls that people didn't want to look for, and collect all those up, and then we'd put them in empty egg cartons, and we would sell them on the edge of our driveway, to people driving past. And then later it was starting my own like lawn mowing business with my neighbor. So my neighbor and I, starting small, but then over the years, like gaining customers. And I've enjoyed that kind of process of like getting out there and doing things and like serving other people and seeing that you could also like make money. Like I learned a lot of like valuable lessons like during that time. Doing other things like shoveling snow in the winters in Pittsburgh, there was a lot of opportunities to do that. So like when school was canceled and, everyone was sleeping in, that was like the day where like we would get up early, and I would call my neighbor up and we would try and do as many driveways as possible. And like, those are just some really good memories that I have of like at the end of the day, sitting down, and we would count up all our earnings and, have hot chocolate and play Nintendo 64 for the rest of the day. But those were things, I guess, that I was really drawn to or was engaged with. So sports and like doing kind of like small business type things. What
about those things, especially those business things, drew you there to them?
Well, so I think the thing, so school and academic learning, if I would say anything negatively about how it is right now, is it is very heavy on like intellectual stuff and test taking. And there's not I guess they don't encourage a lot of like application and experiential learning. And so I felt like, that process was like kind of like real world like learning, where I was able to go and like, just work with your hands and like be outside. And there was a lot of satisfaction in that. So like, it sounds silly, but like, I found just so much more joy in like seeing a lawn, like after you cut it, like that just looks, orderly, and the lines were straight, and the clippings were cleared up, and you knew that like you did a great job, and like the customers or, who you were, serving, appreciated that. And getting that feedback from them just felt really good. It was like immediate. It was like, you knew your work was having an impact, on other people. And so I think the other thing too, is just like how that strengthened my, like just doing work together with somebody else, was really a fun experience. Like my relationship with my neighbor, like those are just good memories that we have together of like starting that business together and doing those things. So yeah, I guess it was maybe just a different way of learning and growing that I felt like was perhaps more catered to my strengths and my interests, and was able to get that like immediate feedback of, hey, if you did a bad job, they weren't going to use you again. They weren't going to call you. And you learn through that process. What did I do wrong? How can we be better about this? And so I guess maybe it was just the way that I learned and grew during that time was what drew me to it.
So how old were you when this was happening?
Yeah, I think that was when I was maybe like 13 years old.
Oh, okay. So kind of moving forward and I guess going to high school now, and did you go to college, or were you planning on going to college for a specific career, or how did that work out?
So well, before we get into college, I think I mentioned earlier, like I would share a little bit about like my my faith story as well. And so I think that was something like I said, like I feel like I struggled in periods of my growing up with purpose and like not really understanding, what that was. And I was fortunate enough, like I had a friend in high school who came from a really, a strong Christian family. And he decided to have like a Bible study in his house. And, one of the things I think that can happen if you grow up in a church environment is you can become comfortable with the culture of being in a church without really knowing where your faith is or being challenged on that. And so I kind of realized through that process that, as we opened up God's word and there was some teaching from that there was a lot of things that I didn't know. And also revealed some things that I was believing that were false at the time. In a book that we went through as well, we obviously study the Bible, but The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And I know people have some conflicting views on that book, but I still remember like the very first line of that book where he says, it's not about you. Your life is not about you. It's about God, and that we were created, with this purpose to actually glorify God. And, that's something that we hear a lot in a church environment. But for me, it hit me in like a completely different way, because I think there was so many voices and things that were saying like, life is actually about you. Life is about, how you can advance and how you can progress and how you can start doing things now for a career that will generate this amount of income. And it just seemed like a very self-centered approach to life. And I felt like that was, without knowing it, was actually pretty empty, thinking that way. And so, when we really dove into this idea that like we were not created, to serve ourselves, and life is not about ourselves, but it is primarily about, bringing glory to God. That it kind of it was like a fundamental like shift. Like, I don't know if you've ever had that happen, like with things that you read or you hear, and it's like, just changes everything. And I think that was really like kind of the start of like how I started to see things differently and live my life differently, was that time during high school. So, leading into college, I went to Grove City College to study business management. And that was still like at the time where the reason why was basically, there's still some uncertainty like about what I wanted to do, but I knew I had like some interest in business. And so it was broad enough where I felt like if I chose that class, those classes, or that major, that it would give me some flexibility to perhaps find what I wanted to do or I was supposed to do.
Would you say at this time, or at least after you had those Bible studies, and I don't know if when you say like that paradigm shift you had, you meant like you became a believer?
Yeah, that is actually a great question. I would say that was still kind of like maybe like planting seeds at that time. Really? Yeah, because like I just knew. So that was maybe the beginning of it, where I realized like, okay, my life is, it shouldn't be about me. It should be about somebody else. And that made sense to me. I think what really changed though was the first couple years that I was in college. I had an experience where my best friend growing up, he was like my brother to me. I was so close with him. He ended up getting sick. He had a rare form of cancer, and he ended up passing away in my freshman year of college. And so like that was really hard for me. It like kind of shook me a little bit. But what ended up happening was it gave me this like intense desire to like understand more. And so it led me to like search the scriptures like more and more, to like just dealing with kind of like the sadness and the heaviness. You know, I was kind of like, where do I go? I just wanted some clarity. And so it led me to the Bible. And so I just,
some more concrete answers.
Yeah. And so I just, like I said, I grew up in the church, but like, I didn't really read the Bible that much. And so for the first time, really, like I started in Genesis and, you know, just kind of started going through the scriptures and like really taking like God at his word with everything. And it just kind of started, like I said before, it kind of just started revealing like some things where it's like, man, I don't know, like if that's what I believe, and I don't know if that's what my church taught me even. That I saw some disconnect between like what I was reading in the Bible and like things that I was believing or being taught, on the other hand. And I would say the breakthrough for me came when I was reading through Romans, and you know that's I think I always had a sense of like, you know, my sin and my guilt. But when I read Romans 3, you know, it talks about how God sent forth his son to be a propitiation for our sins so that he can be both just and the justifier of all who believe in him. And to me, it was like kind of this light went off and it was like the gospel made sense to me. Like it became wisdom to me because I saw this idea that like I had sin in my life, and you know, if God was just, that there was a need for him to punish those sins, and if he didn't punish those sins, he would be unjust if he just let those go. And so
kind of just forgot about the sins without doing anything about them.
Yes, exactly. So like this idea of like, okay, God can forgive us and wipe our sins away. That's true, but there needs to be a way
some
for
form of payment
to deal with those sins first. And so that's when I saw that, you know, Christ was the answer to that. So when it says that like our sins were laid upon him, that means that all the wrong that I did, all the sins, all the evil thoughts that I have, God needed to punish those. But God in his grace and mercy sent forth his son to, in a way, well, what he did was he said, those sins that you've committed, those are mine. I own those sins and I bear them, you know, as if they were my own. And that's when God looked down and punished, you know, those sins in, you know, Christ's body on the cross. And so God was just in that moment in that he, sorry, I got to clear my throat here.
No worries.
He was just in that moment in punishing the sins. And so he didn't just look over them. He dealt with them. And, but because Christ was spotless and he was sinless, and because he was the eternal Son of God, his death provided sufficient payment for those sins. And therefore, it was like, if I believed in him, then I knew that those sins would be paid for, and that I would also receive his righteousness as well, as if it were my own, And so to me, that it was like, it is the basic kind of gospel message and truth, but it really became wisdom and personal to me, in that moment. So I would say, to me, that was the moment that I believed in the gospel.
So to anyone that's listening, I can imagine someone hearing and saying, okay, big deal, you had this realization, but can you give the people an idea of how transformational that is or was in your life? And I would say, of course, even now, but back then, how, I know that understanding you were basically saying it's as if though your life went from darkness to light. Mm-hmm. But can you give people an idea of how much of a difference that was, especially since you had this hard time with your friend passing away?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that the gospel gives freedom. Okay. And so it gives you a sense of freedom of you stop striving with your own goodness. And so that can be a heavy burden to bear if you are constantly thinking about, am I good enough? And have I done the right things today or with my life? And operating under that and thinking that that's what you're going to be judged off of. And so I think a lot of times that's how Jesus is presented to us sometimes, is he's this great model, for us to follow. And he set this great example, and we should just be more like him. That's what people tell us to do. And the thing that I realize is that, Jesus presents himself to us first as someone to be believed in, not someone first that he calls us to imitate. He always says, come to me, believe in me, rest in me, receive my forgiveness, receive my righteousness. And then once we do that, that is when our hearts are actually changed. And that's when things like gratitude, love and joy start to fill our hearts. And so those things are they naturally flow out of your life because of that forgiveness and that relationship that you have. Whereas before, you might just think I have to be God is telling me I need to be more loving. I need to be more joyful. And so it's a burden of, I guess, the law that you're carrying on your own. So I think being freed from that, and seeing just the change that brought into my heart. And then the second thing, I think it just changes completely, how you view other people, and how you interact with them. So sorry, I need to clear my throat one more time. This isn't good podcast etiquette, Timothy.
It's okay. We can, go ahead.
You can cut that out again.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so it's this idea, Jesus tells a parable about, someone who was forgiven this great debt. I think it was, maybe 10,000 talents. And he was forgiven that great debt, but then he went out and he went to someone who owed him 1 talent. And he demanded, that talent from him. And the teaching there was look, you have been forgiven this great debt. How can you go about, exacting payments, from other people, and expecting them to, in a sense, pay off their debt to you. And so I think there's just, grace when it fills your life. It gives you this understanding that, everybody is fallen and in need of grace. And once you've received that, you are so much more willing and able to give that to other people. And so, any type of, bitterness and resentment or grudges that you hold, like, it can't really happen if you have received that forgiveness from God. So I think, as time went on, I think it just, changed a little bit in terms of my heart motivations, in terms of what I wanted to do with my life, but just also how I interacted and treated other people.
Before I ask you how that moment kind of changed your life moving forward, I wanted to also kind of point out that when you become a believer, you have full satisfaction in Christ. In a sense, you are happy. And at least for me, what I realized is, if you meet a lot of people in this world, they always tell you of their big goals, things that they're striving for, that whether they say it consciously or not, but it's basically saying that's going to make me happy once I achieve that. Or they'll say the process of going through those things will help me be happy. And the goal, basically the point of everything there is that something tomorrow is going to make me happy. And it's a really big change in your life when your happiness is already in something you have now. I mean, yes, you are striving for things, but you have this happiness, and it's not just in something that you have now, like a possession, but it's in an eternal Christ who is unchanging. And so it gives you this sense of peace in life, even though you go on striving like anyone else. You work, you do all these things, but it's not out of a sense of becoming fulfilled, because you are already fulfilled in Christ.
Yeah, sense of fulfillment or earning God's favor. And so, like, I know, St. Augustine had that saying that our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Speaking of God, and it's so true that, like, we have this, without God, we have this inner restlessness, or, kind of a void in our heart. And we are always looking to fill that and to satisfy that in different ways. And that can take so many different forms for different people. And that's the question, is like to look at those things and to say, are you pursuing that as a way where you're really trying to find, like, your identity and your happiness, with those things? And if you are, then that's a bad motivation, because, like you said, you're still going to be restless. When that's the case. We were created, God has created us for himself. And because that's the case, anytime we try and pursue anything outside of that, we are going to, in a sense, come up empty.
So you're in college and you become a believer. You said your life has changed. Do you have a different outlook on where you're going to take your life? Do you have more clarity at that time as to what you're going to pursue, to kind of like help us move along and to get you to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think after that initial, like, kind of moment in college, like, I had still had this, like, intense hunger to, study the word, and to also, like, help other people, like, understand it as well, and teach. And so I thought I was, my initial thought was I was, being called into the pastorate. And so, like, those were, in college, I had the opportunity to take, the ability to take a bunch of Bible classes. University is a Christian school. And so those are the ones, like, I really excelled in. I did well. And it wasn't because I was doing it for a grade, but it was because I was genuinely interested in knowing and in learning. And so I just kind of took that as a sign. I was like, just maybe follow that a little bit more, and like pursue this, after college. And so I chose to go to a seminary here in Pittsburgh called Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And that really was the motive and desire, was like, I just wanted to know the word better. And I felt like that was a really helpful thing, even if I wasn't in the pastorate. Like if I spent 3 years, studying God's word and learning from other pastors and teachers during that time, that would be time well spent. So that was why I had made that decision at that time.
So after you went through the Reformed seminary, you went to seminary. What happened in that meantime to get you to start to get in contact with Chick-fil-A? Like, did you get an idea to become an operator and work towards that, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So going back, rewinding a little bit to college. There's a couple of things that happened in there that were significant. And the first one was that part of the requirement as a business major was to attend some lecture series that they would do. And one of the speakers was someone who worked at Chick-fil-A with, I think he was in leadership development at the time. His name was Mark Miller. And he came up, and I didn't know much about Chick-fil-A at the time. Like, Chick-fil-A wasn't that popular in the Northeast and in Pittsburgh. And so he got up there and he talked about the corporate purpose of Chick-fil-A, which is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And I just remember sitting there as a student, and like, as I said, I was kind of going through this process of like, I was studying business, and I was also like studying the Bible. And I was like, I don't know, like, how these two worlds fit together, and wrestling with that. I didn't know of a lot of companies that were doing that well. So when I heard about Chick-fil-A, that was their corporate purpose, and that's what they were driven by, and that they had all these kind of stories to back that up, and to show that it was real. I sat there, I think I was either sophomore or junior, and I was like, Chick-fil-A is a special company. And I told myself, I was like, I could see myself working for them one day. Like, it was a voice inside my head that said that. And so I kept that in my mind. I didn't really act on it. But while I was in seminary, I also had the opportunity just to work in a restaurant, not a Chick-fil-A restaurant, but it was a local restaurant. And I learned through that process. There was a lot of things about working in the restaurant that I really loved. Just the ability to work with your hands, the camaraderie that you have with your teammates, the relationships you have with customers, and just seeing how you can make them happy, through food, was something that I was like starting to grow in, I guess, my interest of that business. And, so that was going on in my mind. And I had a professor who was talking about ministry and like assessing like whether you should go into the ministry or not. And he said something that I didn't forget. He said, if there's anything in your mind that you can do besides ministry, you should go and do that first. And the reason why he said that was because in his belief was that if you're in the ministry, to be a faithful shepherd, like, you have to be all in. Like, it can be so demanding. It can be so it can be so draining that if you have a doubt in your mind, or if you have an interest in the back of your mind where you feel like you might want to pursue that, you might be good at something else. He said, like, you're always going to kind of be like half in and half out, like in that scenario. And so I sat there and I listened, and I was like, I do feel like there's other things that I could do, like with my talents and the way that God has gifted me, and things that I'm interested in pursuing. And I was not 100% sure that the ministry was the route that I should go. And so if I wasn't 100% sure, I didn't want to do it. And so that kind of led me to not pursue the ministry. And so what happened next was my wife and I moved down to Virginia Beach for her education. So she was 2 years younger than I was. She wanted to do her postgraduate studies at Regent University. And so we moved down there, and that's when, like, I had no connections. I had no job lined up, no real, like, significant work experience. And we were planted down there in Virginia Beach, and I had to think about, what am I going to do, for work. And that's kind of when it all came like full circle for me. Was I remembered the talk in college. I remembered my interest in the restaurant industry. And it's just some personal experiences I had with the brand that were really positive. And I was driving my car one night, and that was just kind of this like light bulb moment where I felt like it was, some sort of voice saying, like, why not Chick-fil-A? Like, why not try Chick-fil-A? And so when I got down there, I connected with the local operator that was closest to me. And that was my start.
So when you said, why not Chick-fil-A, was that like a, why not work there because I just need money right now? Was that like just any job, or did you say that with the goal right away of becoming an operator?
Well, I think there was, I think that voice came from like me just having doubts about pursuing it, because, I think that there is, quick service restaurants have a traditionally like maybe a low like reputation, so if you say like, that's what you're going to pursue as your job is working at a quick service restaurant, people probably maybe look down on that and think that that's, not something. And so I think I was battling that in my mind. And I think that voice was just like, hey, like, remember, like, these are things, this is a company that aligns with things that are really important to you. You've had good experiences like with the brand, you have an interest in restaurants, so why not try it? And so the goal though, when I started, was I tried to approach it as much as possible from a humble perspective. And when I say that, I never wanted to go in there and have this mindset that like my goal is to own my own Chick-fil-A one day, because I felt like if I did that, then it would really kind of send this message that like the only reason I was there was to kind of use people as stepping stones and to use my time there as a stepping stone for something else. So my attitude was like, just to go in and do my absolute best with whatever I was asked to do. And if that ended up leading to leadership and other opportunities, that I was going to keep going with it. So yeah, that's how I approached it.
So did you go in and apply to get a job?
Yeah. So, I mean, I connected with the operator, gave him my resume, and he told me to come in for an interview, and, we talked through it, and my operator's name was Brian Burnett. He was a great guy. And, he really just sold me on the ability to influence people, and just the amount of people that we serve and the amount of people that we work with. And that we do have this amazing ability to have a positive influence on the people we work with. And I walked away from that. He offered me, I think it was $12 an hour to start working for him. And so that was the hard part, was that, I liked it. I liked the interview with him, and I went away from that, and I really didn't have any other options. But I had this sense of like shame that I was going to call my parents and tell them like this was my choice. And I did do that. I ended up calling them and telling them that. And there was kind of this response of like, what are you thinking? Like you graduated from a good college with a business management degree. You went to postgraduate school, you got your master's degree, and now you're working for like $12 an hour for a quick service, restaurant. And they're like, what are you going to do? Like, what types of things are you going to be doing? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'll probably like just learn everything. Like, I'll probably work on the register and, work in the kitchen and learn everything there. And I think they just thought I was a little bit crazy. But to me, like I always tell people, like, to me, what it was I believed in the values of Chick-fil-A, and I believed in their, the vision they had. And so I was so aligned with that it was more important to me to work in that type of environment, even if I was making $12 an hour, than to work for a company where, I don't know, maybe make $35,000 or $40,000 a year. And they didn't have those values, and they didn't have that perspective on life. And so I chose purpose over paycheck. So that was, I guess
a little side note would be that basically what you did then is still what you do now in a way, because especially even when we were doing the video, you were still serving people, like help for the video, you were serving people, but like more importantly, you're still influencing and impacting those same people in the restaurant from the very beginning until now, which is interesting because even though obviously you get paid more to do it, you're still able to work in a company that you align with their values and still impact people that way.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because in that initial decision-making process, like I remember, like in a way, like just, calling out to God for some guidance. And the verse that came to mind was Philippians 2, which says, let each of you have the mindset of Christ, that even though he was in essence, he was equal with God, he humbled himself and took the form of a servant, and humbled himself to the point of death. And then that God therefore exalted him, to the highest name, the highest place and highest name. And so, in my mind, I was wrestling with this idea of like, is working for Chick-fil-A and fast food, is that beneath me? Is that something that I am above? And when that verse came to mind, it was really kind of this reminder that like, in life, like you're above nothing. And we're called to have the mindset of Christ. I mean, his humility and what he descended to do on our behalf, was infinite. And so there's so many opportunities for us that we're called to serve and to humble ourselves. And I kind of just took that as like that nudge of like, this is where you should go. And to your point, I've tried to make that like a part of my lifestyle or my leadership style is, just having a willingness to humble yourself and to serve others. And we have so many opportunities to do that every single day.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a Bible verse that says, the Bible says, if you want to be great, well, Jesus said, if you want to be great, you must serve.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a extremely countercultural thing, to say or to believe. But if you're thinking about, progressing or growing in your career, it's like, maybe that's the answer, is how can you serve? How can you make it more about other people and blessing them and developing them? And if you take that mindset and you're willing, to kind of go in and do the hard work associated with that, then I've seen there's a lot of good that comes from that.
So how long did you work for, did you say it was Brian?
Yes. Yeah. I worked for Brian for 4 years. So kind of worked my way up, starting doing team member stuff, and then working into some leadership stuff, and kind of getting my hands, and wrapping my mind around everything in the business.
So, at what point working at Chick-fil-A did you kind of went in with the mindset of, if it works out, it works out. If not, then not. At what point did you realize that this was a more feasible goal, something you really wanted to pursue? Did you have that kind of moment?
Yeah, I think it was like just my growing, confidence, and also like my competence as well. So like, as I continued to work there, like there was, this feeling that like I was starting to get, pretty good at like what I was doing. And so having the confidence and being able to lead others and to produce like the results that were important to my operator and growing the business, and knowing that I had, a significant, kind of part in that through my influence at the restaurant. And so, I think a lot of it was learning, but then towards the end, I really kind of had this sense of like, like you can do this, and like you're good at it, and you understand it. And so when I got to that point, that was kind of what gave me that nudge to say, like, I think you're ready, to kind of do this on your own. So that was like kind of after the third year that I was my operator. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to apply for a restaurant that was opened, or that was available back in Pittsburgh. It was a mall Chick-fil-A, and it was very low volume. The volume was so low that it hadn't been profitable for an operator since it opened in, I think, the late 90s. And so, but for me, it was like, I just wanted the opportunity. I just wanted a chance to get my foot in the door and really prove that I could do it. And so that's what happened.
Did you make that store profit, or did you get that store?
Yeah. So I was selected for that store, and,
did you manage to make it profitable?
Yeah, I did. And I don't want to take all the credit for that, because it was right on the edge of like becoming profitable. And so when I got there, we made some changes and we built on some things. But yes, like that first year we were able to be profitable, and like we were able to grow the business. We almost doubled the sales over the course of 4 years, which is something that I'm really proud of, and just the way we were able to grow the business, but also to grow the people that worked in the business.
Mm-hmm. What was your first impression of being an operator?
Well, I mean, there was just a ton of learning that needed to happen, because I think that I felt like I needed to do everything. And that was bad in a way, because I was working longer and I just didn't know how effective that was. And so I had to really grow in the sense of like letting go of certain things and trusting the people that I wanted to develop around me. And so I would say that I was still kind of operating like as like a general manager when I first took over and really trying to do everything by myself. But then I learned like I really had to let go and really kind of make a bet on my leaders that if I invested in them and then if I chose the right people, that they would step up and that they would take on, you know, some of those responsibilities and would do a better job if it was just me, you know, doing those things.
So how long did you have that mall Chick-fil-A? Because I know right now you have a different Chick-fil-A in Washington.
Yeah. So it was 4 years. And like it was like the perfect amount of time because it was enough time for me again to like, you know, just to really learn the business and learn like how to change kind of like my role from being like a manager to like an owner and like a leader. And it was enough time for me to get the confidence and like the results that we were getting too. So to see the business grow and for us to get certain results, like it just gave me the confidence that, you know, I guess like what you're doing is working, and you can take those principles and you can apply them in other ways and you'll be successful. So 4 years seemed like a long time, but it was the perfect amount of time for me.
And so what happened to get you to the Washington location?
Yeah. So the store in Washington, the operator, who's actually a good friend of mine, he was a roommate of mine in college. Yeah, it's a neat coincidence there. And he is one of the reasons why also that I decided to work for Chick-fil-A was kind of his blazing the trail there. But he decided to move back home closer to his family in Arizona. And so that store became available. And, you know, my attitude, you know, with everything, even going back to working for my operator, and also when I was at the mall, was that I wanted the reason why I chose the next opportunity to be because I felt like I outgrew like my current situation and that I was ready for a new challenge. And so I felt like that was a really good mindset to have where it's like, if I grew as much as I could under my operator, and then it just got to a point where like, hey, the next step in your growth is, you know, to become an operator and do it yourself on your own, then that's the step I wanted to take. And then at the mall, it was the same mindset where it was like, I didn't want to view it as like, oh, I can't wait to get out of the mall. Like I wanted to be really focused there on the people and the business and do the best that I absolutely could. And that if that led to a point where I felt like I did everything that I could in terms of growing myself and other people in the business. And then the next step would be like, okay, do it at a higher volume and with more people and with more challenges. Then that was the next step that I wanted to take. So after 4 years, I thought that was where I was. And so I applied for the store. They interviewed me for it, and they selected me for it.
That's awesome. I feel like the attitude that you just mentioned is very rare nowadays, where a lot of people are also striving for something greater, but that sense of being grateful and content in the moment as well. And as it even says, to be grateful and content in all circumstances. I think that's very valuable and very rare to find nowadays.
It is. It's like this balance of like contentment, which is good, and also having like I would say like a godly ambition too, where it's like, you know, you can be content in all and every circumstance, but you know that perhaps God has placed some things on your heart that like you want to see happen, and think in ways in which you want to grow, and it's good to have that as well, but it needs to be for the right reasons and from the right motivations.
What do you think would be one of the greatest challenges of being a Chick-fil-A operator?
I think one of the biggest challenges is I want to say like just having good, healthy like boundaries in your life. And what I mean by that is like there's so much that's going on like in our restaurants like every day. There's things that we can improve on. Like there's so many things that you could do. Like someone said, like you could do more than 24 hours of work, and there's more than 24 hours of work to be done when it comes to Chick-fil-A. And so there's this understanding, I guess, that you have to step back and recognize that, it can't all be done at once. And Chick-fil-A is great about this. Like they always encourage us. They say like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. What they don't want to see is people that just go so hard, early on in their career, or when they're in a new situation, and then they end up burning themselves out. And in those situations, I think they don't have good boundaries in their life. And so they're always saying yes to the business. They're always staying later at the business, and they end up saying no to things like their family or their faith or their personal health, things that just help them be their absolute best. And then what that ends up leading to is, some isolation, fatigue, and just a sense of burnout. And so it's really hard because I think everyone that is a Chick-fil-A operator cares deeply about Chick-fil-A, and they care about their restaurants. And so I'd say like kind of just managing that and knowing like, what do I say yes to? And when do I decide to say no, and prioritize other things in my life that are important to me.
What would you say your favorite part about being an operator?
Favorite part about being an operator, it does all come down to influence. And I would say like, we get to see that with customers a lot, like just the ability to, be a light in the community and to brighten people's days. Like that's great. But I would say even more so for me, it's the opportunity to see how like team members grow and develop and mature when they're in our restaurants. There's really not a better feeling because like you're with kids sometimes when they're like 16 years old. And like if you can see them coming in at 16, first job, and then when they leave, maybe when they're 18, 19 or 20, or if someone decides like they want to pursue Chick-fil-A as a career too, you get to see like this process of how they grew from the time they came to when they ended. And to me, like that's just a tremendous feeling.
Would you, so like being where you are now and looking back, what would you say to your younger self? Maybe like when you're in high school or at that moment when like your friend passed away, at that moment, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, I guess maybe just a verse that came to mind was, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and your paths shall be straight. So I think of all, is that in the background? Oh man, yeah. That's crazy. That's the only reason I was able to recite that word for word is because of that.
It was behind my shoulder.
Yeah. No, I think many of the griefs and the confusion that we have in our life is based off of a failure to do that. And so if I was talking to my younger self, I would say, do that as soon as possible, have that as your mindset, as your focus, is to seek after the Lord, seek after his wisdom, to trust in him with all your heart. And a lot of those things, we know that hardship's always a part of your life, but some of that unnecessary, confusion, restlessness,
worrying.
Worrying. goes away. So that's what I tell my younger self.
And I want to ask one last question, and that is,
Yes.
looking forward for you, what does Yanak want to do?
Oh, Timothy, that is a hard-hitting question. That is actually, and I'll be fully transparent. That's one of the things that I have been wrestling with in a sense, because I think a dynamic that I have struggled with is this idea that, like, at least through my career in Chick-fil-A, like, there's this idea of like working up as a team member and like mall operator. Like, once you kind of get to like freestanding operator, like, it kind of seems at least like you've arrived, like you've gotten to really kind of like maybe the highest point, that you'll get in your career. And so that can be a difficult place to live in, and you have to be careful with that. I have to be careful with that, because you can't rest on that, and you can't let that dampen your desire to grow as an individual and as a leader. So I think that like John Maxwell is a leadership author, and he used an example of someone who says, like, very similarly, that he was stuck. He was talking to a guy who felt like he was stuck because he said, I have accomplished every goal that I set out for myself. And because he felt that way, he was stuck and there was nowhere for him to go. And what John Maxwell says is there's a difference between being goal oriented and being growth oriented. So when you're goal oriented, like, you get to that goal and like that's it, that's the destination. But if you are growth oriented, that is like a lifelong process, and that's ongoing, and we're doing that until we die, And so, I think for me, that's what I'm challenging myself with, is ways to find myself to, still have goals, but to focus on being, having a growth mindset and growing for me. So, I know I have a lot of opportunities to be a better leader, to serve my team better, to be better at the restaurant. And so I think that just remains my focus, is trying to have that intentionality behind what's in front of me right now, and do my best with that and see where it goes.
That's awesome. And I think you could kind of affirm this, that anyone that's pursuing anything in their life, especially big goals, they have to be careful to test themselves and to realize that their joy and peace is not coming from the accomplishment of those things or the process of accomplishing those things, because we have to realize that the end of everything on this earth is temporary. Even though we might have current joy and some accomplishment, all of those things are temporary. They will go away at some point. And it's important for us to have meaning and purpose found in something that's greater than ourselves, greater than anything we could achieve, which is, in my understanding, Christ.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's so many examples of that in Scripture, but the one that comes to mind is what profits a man if he gains the whole world, and he forfeits his soul. And so, even as believers, like, we can get sidetracked, and we can really pursue things and go after things to the neglect maybe of our own souls or the neglect of other people's. And so we have to have a proper mindset, and we have to know these things are passing. And that, I think when you do that, though, it gives you a real healthy lens to know that, like, in the process of pursuing those things, what you're hoping to do is to, transform yourself, and to transform other people, and to bless them, and to honor God in the process of doing that.
Awesome. Jay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you sticking it through with me and sharing your story, because it was really interesting to hear. And I think that anyone that heard it also will benefit from it. Some more than others, but I think it's a very good thing we did this. Thank you so much, Jay.
Timothy, it's my pleasure. And I thank you for having me on.